Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be continuing on our journey through Motor City Drama, a fictional history on the founding of the Big Three by Russell Lee Doré. And today we're going to be getting into Chapter 2, laying the groundwork for General Motors. We're going to tell the story today of Billy Durant. We're going to go into Buick a little bit, and we're going to circle back to another connection with the Ford Motor Company that I didn't even know was a connection. If you guys remember from Chapter 1, one of the big things that I found out about Ford Motor Company was how these two brothers, John Horace and Horace Dodge, worked at Henry Ford Motor Company. And lo and behold, they went on to build their own automobile. Dodge ends up being consumed by Chrysler, and Dodge, the Dodge brand is still around today. So it all started from Ford Motor Company, where these two brothers were supplying the parts for Henry Ford in all of those early models up until the Model N, when Ford had established the Ford Manufacturing Company. Quick move by Ford, established the FMC, the Ford Manufacturing Company. Henry Ford didn't run the company. I think he was just the principal engineer of it. But Alex sold the stock to Henry Ford because I don't think they were making a lot, because they were all of a sudden spending more on parts, and the parts were coming from Henry Company. And then the Dodge brothers eventually ended their relationship with exclusively supplying Ford with parts. They had an exclusive contract to just supply it to Ford, which was kind of, a risky situation for them, because we're supplying parts to Ransom Olds. Oh yeah, did I mention that? We're going to talk about Oldsmobile a little bit today too. And the Oldsmobile, that curved dash Oldsmobile car, was like the highest selling car at the time, right around here, early 1900s. Anyway, we're talking a lot about Chapter 1 here. Let's continue with Chapter 2, and let's go to the first slide. There we go, Buick Manufacturing. And this is what Russell starts off talking about. So we have this character, David Buick, and Russell writes that there were three automotive pioneers whose companies eventually became significant in forming General Motors, that were all in operation before General Motors was founded. So one of them is this Buick Manufacturing Company, started by David Buick, who was a Scottish-born engineer. You can see the dates where he lived from. And David, as with other people in the automotive industry, like Henry Ford started working on engines for maritime vessels. We're going to see Ransom Olds was working on guns and the parts for that before he started in automobiles. The Dodge brothers, I have a blog post about this. The Dodge brothers had a bicycle business in manufacturing parts for automobiles. So lots of people doing lots of different things before they came to cars, and David Buick's no exception to this. In 1884, he had a plumbing business. And he had a patent on a method of applying porcelain to stamped steel or cast iron. From what I understand, from what I read, this is a technique that is, I believe, still used today. Don't ask me on the details on this because I'm not a plumber. But eventually, David took an interest in engines. He sold his company, his plumbing company, in 1899, and took an interest in cars. in this new venture with these two other gentlemen, Walter Marr and Eugene Richards, who started working on an overhead valve engine, which at the time was a new concept because before that there was the side valve engine. I didn't really get too much into the detail on the difference between an overhead valve and the side valve, but kind of a radical concept at the time. We're talking early 1900s here. So they formed Buick Manufacturing Company. But Buick Manufacturing Company is kind of in trouble. They made in 1902, or it was formed in 1902. Buick only had 37 cars, though, in 1904. Or do I have the numbers here? There we go. Okay. So Russell writes it was founded the Buick Manufacturing Company in Flint, Michigan in 1902 to develop automobiles. But Buick built only 37 cars in 1904 and was in trouble. Okay, so it's 1903, only 6 to 15 cars made. They doubled it in 1904, but that's not a lot of cars, guys. Buick moves to Flint in September 1903. So my sourcing for this, part of it was the book, H. Eugene Weiss book. I think I have it at the very end of this slideshow. Because I'm trying to gauge when Buick. So Buick must have been formed before this 1902 or maybe shortly thereafter. So maybe it was formed in 1902. Later in 1902, it's starting to run out of money. That's when these two guys come in, Benjamin and Frank Briscoe, founders of another car company, lots of car companies in Michigan in this time, United States Motors. So they jump in to invest some money in it. Eventually, Benjamin Briscoe sells his interest in the company to this guy, James Whiting. James Whiting of the Flint Wagon Works invested heavily in Buick to save it from financial ruin. Now, there's another local wagon builder. So there's the Flint Wagon Works, James Whiting, but then there's also Billy Durant, who has Durant Dort Carriage Company. Now, these are carriages for horses. Largest selling wagon maker in the country. And in 1904, he was pushing 150,000 wagons per year. That sounds like kind of a lot. Wow. And Billy actually famously said how he did not believe the automobile would be the future. He still believed in horses. And it's funny, the conversation that Russell kind of plays out here in this chapter about, he's asking James Whiting, Jim, do you really think this horseless carriage thing is going to stick? So to shed more light on that, James Whiting ends up meeting with Durant. Now remember, James Whiting has now invested heavily in Buick Motor Company. Obviously, James Whiting believes in these horseless carriages. And James Whiting is trying to convince Billy Durant to invest in Buick with him and manage it. Now, the story goes here that Durant really doesn't want to. He does not believe in it at all. Why would you want to risk your life in this contraption? But Billy Durant undergoes a religious conversion when James Whiting lends him a Buick for like a weekend or something like that. He takes it for a spin, and all of a sudden, Durant sees the light and catches a glimpse of the future. He takes over management of Buick. And in 1904, Buick Manufacturing turns into Buick Motor Company. So Billy Durant, that name's going to come up a little bit later too. So if you guys saw that, Olds Motor Works to REO Motors. So now we're getting into Ransom E. Olds, another automotive pioneer. So, who was Ransom Olds? Well, Ransom Olds, one of the founders of Olds Motor Works. But before that, we had, well, let me say this. Where Ransom got his experience from in machining, manufacturing, automotive, etc., well, it kind of ran in the family. So Ransom Olds came from a family that had a machine shop, which was started by his dad, Pliny Olds, in Lansing, Michigan. This machine shop in 1892 receives an investment from Sam Smith. Sam Smith is a lumber baron. He's invested in copper mines, real estate, so kind of like an Alexander Malcolmson kind of feel here. And now Pliny's shop made steam engines for ships, again, maritime vessels. Steam engines, this is back when steam engines were a thing, not the internal combustion engine. But they also made stationary steam engines that powered machines. So his son also worked in the shop. Pliny Olds' son was Ranny, a.k.a. Ransom E. Olds. Now, Ransom Olds, while he's working in this shop, helps design and manufacture a gasoline steam engine. Internal combustion. So Ransom sees that, much like David Buick or James Whiting, unlike Billy Durant, he's saying that these self-propelled carriages are the future. So he builds a steam-powered car in 1887. Wow. And he sells that steam-powered car, maybe not that exact same one, but in 1892. Then he catches a glimpse of an internal combustion engine at the world's famous World's Fair of Chicago in 1893. You guys got to take a look at these World's Fairs. They're so insane to look at some of the pictures and how massive they were back in these days. Imagine having something like that around today. I can't believe it. So, sorry, hair got caught in my mouth. I hate when that happens. But Ransom ends up starting a company. He has the Olds Gasoline Works, which eventually turns into the Olds Motor Vehicle Company, which eventually, I'm trying to figure out the timeline here. Because I don't know if it went Olds Gasoline Works, Olds Motor Vehicle Company, and then Olds Motor Works, which was founded in 1899. And again, from a huge investment from Samuel Smith, whose sons ended up having leadership positions at Olds Works. So kind of a similar situation to Ford, in which it sounded like an arrangement where Olds was the engineer, the guy who made the cars, but the Samuel Smith's sons kind of ran the company in the direction of it. And yeah, this is where that famous curved dash automobile was made by Oldsmobile or Olds Motor Works, and this was one of the most popular cars at this time. So Russell outlines a conversation between Ransom Olds and Fred. This is Fred Smith. So this is one of the sons of Sam Smith. So this takes place in 1905 in Lansing, Michigan, and they're clashing over who is really the end-all, be-all, who's the final decision maker on things. And Olds is trying to say, hey, it's me. You know, my name's on the frickin' building. But there's a problem in that Olds is not really pushing the higher priced cars. We saw a similar problem with Ford, where at his previous companies, he was so focused on racing, he wasn't really focused on building a car to take it to the regular consumer. So they have this clash, Randy and Freddie have this clash over this certification, this quality certification for the shop. And Fred just goes ahead and gets it because he thinks that it's going to give them a marketing advantage. And Ransom's kind of upset. He's like, well, you should have kind of have consulted with me on this before you went and made this decision. Randy's kind of saying, that idea is not worth the cost of implementing it, as I told you before, but there is a bigger issue. My name is on the plant here in Lansing, so I should be able to decide how we're going to handle things. Things are getting spicy. So there was a clash between money and quality of the product. And what ends up happening is Ransom Olds ends up leaving the company in that same year. 1903, or is this 1905? 1905. Later that year, Ransom Olds forms REO. Okay, sorry, I'm skipping ahead. He ends up leaving the company and starting, REO Motors. Ransom E. Old Motors. Initially, it was called R.E. Olds Motor Car Company. And again, this is famous for the REO Speedwagon, which is a band. REO Speedwagon. I understand where that comes from. So Ransom founds REO Motors, and then he later goes on to outsell Oldsmobile. And then the Oldsmobile ends up becoming a little bit in trouble. They might get taken over by GM. We might later find out. Next, we got this character, Henry Leland. Henry Leland, another... I wonder if I included this in here. Another relationship to the Ford Motor Company, as we're going to see. So Leland and Faulkner Machine Shop. So Leland was from Vermont. He came to Detroit at the tail end of the 1800s. And again, he got his start with making rifles during the Civil War. Yeah, Leland's pretty old. He was born like 1840s, something like that. So yeah, Civil War got started 1861, 1862, something like that. He later goes on to become a parts supplier for Olds Motor Works, where he's producing the transmissions for those cars. And then later, he starts to produce the engines for Oldsmobile. Well, he's getting some success, and he has a proposition for Olds. He makes improvements to the engine so that, well, I write it here, valve timing improvements increase the horsepower from 4 to 7 to eventually 10 horsepower. So he's increasing the horsepower of the engine. And he's got the design for it. He offers it to Oldsmobile, but is refused. And he's talking to this guy, Nick Herrick, who's a manufacturing manager at Olds Motor Works. This all happens 1902. And Nick turns him down because he thinks that the extra power that's going to come from that engine, from that horsepower, is going to cause issues with the rest of the car. And he's kind of thinking, well, why should we increase the power of this? The curved dash is already a success. It's selling a ton. You don't want to mess up a good thing. So here's where the Henry Ford Company steps in. Again, this was the second company that Ford was involved in after Detroit Automobile Company, and then before the investment from Alex Malcolmson and his friends to form a Ford Motor Company. So there was the guy, if you remember, William Murphy, who was one of the investors in the Henry Ford Company. Turns out that him and Leland are kind of tight, and they go to I think it was like the same church. So, I got a spelling error there. He brings Leland on to be a consultant in this whole thing, in his venture in the Henry Ford Company. Because he wants him to assess everything. I think this is after Henry Ford leaves too. Henry Ford leaves the Henry Ford Company. He brings on Henry Leland just to kind of assess everything, see as a consultant. Again, come see like what we have. Is anything like worth still pursuing? I'm trying to look at the book. We hired you to appraise the equipment so that we can liquidate it. Do you have your figures for me today? So this is kind of like how Russell's portraying it in his book. Like, hey, we just want you to come in, tell us if this stuff is worth anything. You have experience with making parts, engines, transmissions, etc. And now there was two schools of thought of this that I read from one of the articles, external articles, was, again, I thought from one source, Leland was brought on after Ford left and the company needed appraisal of its value. That's what we were just saying. But there's also this other school of thought that says Henry Leland was brought on board while Ford was still with the company. God, another spelling error. But either way, and that's a picture of Henry Leland there. Either way, yep, you see that name up there. The Henry Ford Company ends up reorganizing when they bring in Henry Leland. They end up reorganizing everything as the conversation goes here. Yes, Bill, but before we go over them, let me tell you my idea. You have a pretty good operation here, and I think it can be saved. I have the engineering background to help you do this. I also have a new 10-horsepower engine I developed for Olds, but they're not interested. So Henry repurposes the proposal that he had with Ransom Olds, and he brings it over to the Henry Ford Company and says, hey, they didn't want this higher horsepower engine, so let's use what you already have here that Ford was doing. And by the way, Henry was like super, well, they're both named Henry. Leland was super, I think, critical of Ford's designs and stuff, or like kind of the way Ford was going about things. So he was like, hey, let's just repurpose what you guys have here with my engine. And they reorganize it under a name called Cadillac, which is still around today, named after a French explorer and the so-called founder of Detroit. So Cadillac was founded later that year. This is from a date I got from an external source here, August 22nd, 1902. And it quickly becomes a successful company, and it eventually is awarded this Dewar Trophy, by the Royal Automobile Club of London. Very prestigious trophy. And then later, it ends up being a part of this company called GM, General Motors. So this chapter was to kind of set the foundation for what other automotive companies there were out there, and what companies are about to come together to form General Motors. So we talked about Buick. We talked about Olds. We finished up talking about Cadillac. That was it, right? Just those three. Buick, Olds. Yeah. I don't know why I'm going crazy. Buick, Olds, Henry Leland. Yeah, okay. Cadillac. So later you might see these companies under the GM umbrella. Very fancy. And guys, those are my sources there. Guys, thank you very much for listening this far. We'll be back Chapter 3 next time. Actually, Chapter 3 is titled Billy Durant Founds General Motors, so we're going to be talking more on the companies that make up GM. Check out the blog. I have a new blog post this week going into a little more detail on the Dodge brothers and the Ford relationship. And other than that, guys, I really appreciate you listening. Thank you so much. Hope y'all have a great rest of your day. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care.